Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the task force, DOJ staff, and happy Black History Month. It's a pleasure to see you all again. Thank you for this opportunity to present a report on the modern reparations movement from the point of view of the grassroots activists nationally who came together, engaged in the work, and who have been driving the reparations momentum for several years now. It is an incredible honor to be here today representing the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants, or NAASD. We are a network of grassroots organizations and affiliates that formed in 2019 for the explicit purpose of advocating for compensatory reparations for Black Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Next slide, please. Like others today, in honor of Freedmen history, I will begin by showing appreciation to a few notable reparationists who laid the groundwork for our modern movement. In no particular order, these include Reverend Garrison Frazier, Henrietta Wood, Frederick Douglass, Callie DeGuy House, Reverend Isaiah Dickerson, Queen Mother Audley Moore, Father Divine, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Dr. Claude Anderson, Randall Robinson, Johnny Lee Cochran Jr., Charles J. Ogletree, Congressman John Conyers, Dr. William Darity, and A. Kirsten Mullen. Without their selfless contributions and sacrifices, I doubt we would be here today. Next slide, please. On a personal note, I want to wish my grandmother Bernice Allen Stimley a happy, early, heavenly birthday today. She was born February 24th, 1909 in Meehan Junction, Mississippi, a town you won't find on any map. She was a remarkable woman and a community nurturer. At top right is pictured Stimley Allen Grocery Store that she and my grandfather Charles owned and operated for several years in their neighborhood of Georgetown in Jackson, Mississippi. She loved our people dearly and deeply, worked to better her community, and instilled the same ethic in her children and grandchildren. On the left, she is pictured in her 100th year of life, casting a vote in 2008 for Barack Obama. I saw the joy of someone who was the grandchild of enslaved people, had lived half her life under virulent Jim Crow terrorism, now able to vote for a Black president. Next slide, please. The modern day reparations movement can be framed into two distinct phases, each characterized by its unique goals, strategies, leadership, and effectiveness. Here I have bulleted a few distinguishing characteristics and milestones of each phase. As you heard earlier today, phase one of the modern movement, or as I will call it, the legacy phase, saw the founding of the National Coalition for Black Reparations in America, NCOBRA, in 1987. It gained momentum following the 1988 Civil Liberties Act and triumphed with the introduction of Congressman John Conyers' H.R. 40 in 1989. This phase is largely characterized by Pan-African ideology and led by the activists of NCOBRA and its more recently founded partner organization, National African American Reparations Commission, or NARC. This phase gave rise to federal reparations legislation H.R. 40 and kept the reparations conversation alive. However, the legacy phase of the modern reparations movement unfortunately produced no significant national support for H.R. 40 in its 30 years of legislative life. Phase two, or the contemporary reparations movement, began circa 2016 in the aftermath of the Obama administration and coalesced in online conversations around political education, data, and lineage, which remain core pillars of this phase. The contemporary movement was born out of the Black American grassroots and is led by Black American grassroots organizers and activists who are self-advocating for our shared goals of federal reparations and lineage-based public policy. It's in phase two that organizations such as NAASD and Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, or CJEC, were born. The grassroots advocacy of these and other contemporary reparationist groups is principally responsible for mainstreaming reparations and for moving congressional and public support of H.R. 40 to an all-time high. This contemporary phase of the modern reparations movement is where I am most familiar and is where I will focus today. Next slide, please. The contemporary reparations movement began largely in response to the failure of the Obama administration to produce any tangible results for most of Black America. For 8 years, other groups received policy and protections, while Black Americans received a consistent diet of symbolism, apathy, and cautious rhetoric. Adding insult to injury, the federal government's response to the extrajudicial murders of Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, and Laquan McDonald was the Blue Alert Act, which granted more protections to police officers. Contemporary reparations view these years as a failure, one, of both the federal government to specifically address the Black American community's interests, and two, of the Black political apparatus to focus on reparative policy agendas and hold our elected officials accountable to them. Next slide, please. The contemporary reparations movement is also rooted in quantifiable data. A central tenet of contemporary reparationists is that if it can be measured, it can be improved. Grassroots reparations activists across the country are studying, tracking, processing, and advocating for wealth data that uncovers the specific, unique, and urgent economic plight of Black American communities. When reviewing the Obama years through data, we were able to see that the outcomes specifically for Black Americans were disastrous. Between 2008 and 2016, Black American wealth declined sharply as white wealth hit new heights facilitated by government bailouts and financial assistance, further exacerbating the lineage wealth gap. In online conversations, everyday Black Americans began to discuss what effective Black politics could and should look like. With burgeoning political education and a lens of data, Black America's decline as a result of government policy became very apparent. Data also revealed the unique nature of Black American divestment compared to other Black groups. With release of the multi-city Color of Wealth reports in 2016 by Duke University, the New School, and UCLA, contemporary reparationists gained access to disaggregated Black wealth data, and for the first time, the wide wealth disparities between Black Americans who descend from U.S. chattel slavery and more recent Black immigrants came into full view. In summary, we learned lineage was the key, and that Black American politics must be agenda-focused and lineage first. Next slide, please. Since formation, it has been NAASD's position that Black American descendants of U.S. chattel slavery are the appropriate beneficiary class, and that any reparations effort must center the descendant community based on lineage. This is also not a new concept. In his final book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, Dr. King writes, "Every man must ultimately confront the question, who am I, and seek to answer it honestly. Who are we? We are descendants of slaves. We are the offspring of noble men and women who were kidnapped from their native land and chained in ships like beasts. But we are also American. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America. In spite of the psychological appeals of identification with Africa, the Negro must face the fact that America is now his home, a home that he helped build through blood, sweat, and tears." That was in 1968. This task force will make history this week when you vote on the question of who should be eligible for reparations in California. Contemporary reparationists believe Dr. Weber was clear, just as Dr. King was clear, in their intent to center lineage in Black American identity and repair. NAASD is confident the task force, after hearing all of the evidence, will make the correct decision. I will also note here that in addition to our recentering Black American identity around descendant lineage, contemporary reparationists have resurfaced and affirmed our long-lost political status as American freedmen conferred onto the formerly enslaved in 1865 through Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. By lineage, we are descendants of slaves. By political status, we are American freedmen. Both are necessary to ultimately reach our goal of reparation. Next slide, please. Also in 1968, in his Two Nations of Black America address, Dr. King provided marching orders to contemporary reparationists. Please play the video.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Next slide, please. Driven by political education, rooted in data, and with the urgency of pending economic extinction, contemporary reparations activists emerged from the grassroots all across America, committed to completing Dr. King's mission of economic justice. We came together offline, we organized, and we went to work. Next slide, please. As we spread the lineage reparations message in our communities, the contemporary movement grew from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands and soon to be millions. Next slide, please. Grassroots Black Americans across the country took action and began to self-advocate our collective interests, centering reparations and lineage-specific policy. Next slide, please. We sought out our representatives, both locally and nationally, and demanded their support for reparations in exchange for our political and voting capital. Next slide, please. When the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the country in 2020, contemporary reparationists continued to advocate virtually, utilizing technology to communicate and to organize. The pandemic has been a test of the strength and resilience of the contemporary reparations movement, but the grassroots have proven sturdy. Next slide, please. When corporate interests attacked the Civil Rights Act of 1866, seeking to roll back our oldest and most fundamental constitutional protections, it was the grassroots reparations activists that rallied and protested on the steps of the Supreme Court in our collective defense. Next slide, please. Here you can plainly see the impact of the second contemporary phase of the modern reparations movement. Before the emergence of contemporary reparationists, H.R. 40 had not achieved more than 50 co-sponsors in any legislative session. It is the work of grassroots reparationists nationally that should be properly credited for the nearly 200 congressional co-sponsors now attached to the bill. The chart to the right shows the dramatic and correlating increase in internet searches for reparations, which took off circa 2019, again pointing to the powerful impact of the Black grassroots. Next slide, please. The grassroots reparations work has been effective, compelling on Juneteenth 2019, for the first time in a decade, a hearing on H.R. 40 by the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. On that day, anyone paying attention could again see the Black grassroots impact throughout the halls of Capitol Hill. The Black American grassroots were clearly demanding to be heard on reparations. Next slide, please. On the subject of H.R. 40, it's important to clarify the position of NAASD and of Black American contemporary reparationists. H.R. 40 is a poorly constructed piece of legislation that has undergone significant revisions in recent years. These revisions threaten its integrity and chances for success. Among its myriad of flaws, stand out the fact that 1, H.R. 40 does not specifically identify eligible recipients for reparations. 2, H.R. 40 does not speak to direct payments to eligible recipients. 3, H.R. 40 does not identify closure of the lineage wealth gap as a primary goal of reparations. And 4, H.R. 40 does not identify the federal government as the capable and culpable party for reparations. But in addition to those legislative flaws, the April 2021 revision of H.R. 40 removed application of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, the FACA, that ensures transparent deliberations, public meetings, and ongoing public reporting, while also maintaining GS-18 equivalent compensation as payments to commission members. That is unacceptable to contemporary reparations. For several years, NAASD and our affiliates supported H.R. 40, but we have also persistently advocated for edits to fix these flaws in order to strengthen the bill's chances of becoming law. Thus far, our calls have gone unanswered. As grassroots Black American reparationists, truly and selflessly committed to the goal of reparations, we find ourselves unable to support H.R. 40 any longer. Stated clearly, support of H.R. 40 in its present form is not support of Black American reparations. Our community has been awaiting reparations for more than 150 years, and we deserve strong federal legislation that has the best chance of success. Next slide, please. Notably, NAASD's position on H.R. 40 aligns with leading reparations scholars Dr. William Sandy Darity and A. Kirsten Mullen, foremost American constitutional scholar and UC Berkeley Law Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, and Mr. John Tateishi, former director of the successful Japanese American Redress Campaign that produced the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. On an issue as paramount as reparations, it would be foolhardy not to heed expert warnings. I believe everyone on the task force agrees that California is leading the reparations conversation and that what is done here will resonate with the federal government. In that leadership capacity, part of your responsibility is to advocate for federal legislation and a process that mirrors AB 3121, particularly in specificity on eligibility and transparency to the Black American grassroots community. Please be bold in that leadership. Next slide, please. Policy writing is a core component of NAASD's contemporary reparations advocacy, and we have developed a strong alternative bill to H.R. 40 that we are calling H.R. 1865, paying homage to the year of American freedmen emancipation. H.R. 1865 has the support of Dr. William Darity and A. Kirsten Mullen, and NAASD is presently seeking a congressional sponsor to introduce the legislation. In the same way contemporary reparationists uplifted H.R. 40, we will build grassroots support around H.R. 1865, a true reparations bill. In addition to improved federal reparations legislation, in August 2021, NAASD released the historic Repair Act, which is an acronym from reconciliation, equity, protections, atonement, investment, and remuneration. The Repair Act is a lineage-based policy platform designed to address the deep inequities Black Americans face across all areas of socioeconomic activity. We have shared the Repair Act with various Biden administration staffers, including the Domestic Policy Council, whose feedback was that it was the most comprehensive policy package they had ever seen from a grassroots advocacy group. Priorities for presidential action, a subset of the Repair Act, consists of 12 legislative memos that can immediately be enacted via presidential executive order. Chief among them are formation of a John Conyers Reparations Commission based on H.R. 1865, creation of a new census designation specifically for Black American U.S. slavery descendants, and reestablishment of a National Freedmen's Bureau. Next slide, please. Specific to California, NAASD, CJEC, and our local affiliates have been advocating around AB 3121 before there was a bill called AB 3121. And when formally introduced in the California State Assembly, members of NAASD Los Angeles and CJEC played a pivotal role in crafting eligibility language that appears in AB 3121 law today, setting it apart from HR 40. We worked closely with Dr. Shirley Weber's office, state legislators, and community stakeholders for years to advance, raise awareness, and ultimately pass AB 3121 into law. This hard work was recently recognized with the selection of CJEC as an anchor organization to this task force. Other local legislative efforts of NAASD and CJEC include AB 1604, the Upward Mobility Act of 2022. This bill, introduced in the current session of the California State Assembly, consists of language that would, for the first time ever, require all state agencies, boards, and commissions to disaggregate the Black African American category in their data collection and collect data specifically on the Black American descendant community. This is an historic effort, essential to the output and efficacy of this reparations body. NAASD and affiliated grassroots reparationists are pursuing similar data disaggregation efforts in New York, Maryland, and Texas currently. NAASD and CJEC are also rallying support around ACA 3, the California Slavery Abolition Act, a bill that will finally close the abomination of a slavery loophole in the California state constitution, ending involuntary servitude as punishment for crime in the state. NAASD and CJEC are proud to also partner with Mr. Samuel Brown, principal author of ACA 3, who crafted the bill's language while serving a 24-year incarceration sentence. If Samuel is watching, welcome home again, brother, and thank you for your work. In 2021, following meetings between NAASD Los Angeles and Mayor Eric Garcetti, Executive Director of the LA Civil Rights Department Capri Maddox, and Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley, the mayor introduced a reparations commission similar to this task force. The LA Commission will serve in an advisory capacity to the mayor, develop a pilot reparations program, and NAASD co-chair KJ Muhammad has been appointed to the commission by Mayor Garcetti. Next slide, please. Here you can see some of NAASD's partner organizations and affiliates who are working in tandem with us to achieve the goal of federal reparations for the descendant community. We are committed to educating and training American freedmen, the Black American descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, around civic engagement, political science, nonprofit formation, and policy writing so our people can self-advocate and be successful. Education and training are hallmarks of the contemporary reparations movement. Next slide, please. Finally, last year, I had the honor to interview two living icons of the civil rights movement, Mr. Cortland Cox and Mr. David Dennis Sr., who worked alongside Dr. King, Medgar Evers, Stokely Carmichael, Ella Baker, James Farmer, Bayard Rustin, and many other Black American freedom fighters of the 1960s. In conversation with Mr. Cox and Mr. Dennis, they shared the movement ideology that fueled their advocacy and success. Simply, that ideology is that movements are best bottom up, not top down, and movements are fundamentally about people, not organizations. That is the same ideology which drives the contemporary phase of the modern reparations movement. And in that spirit, this slide recognizes just a few of the contemporary grassroots organizers and activists who are moving the modern reparations movement forward. Next slide, please. In closing, we descendants of American slaves, the emancipated American freedmen, the builders of this country, the overwhelming Black majority in this country, are owed a debt of reparations by the U.S. government. We are coming to get our check. All power to the people and reparations by any means necessary. Happy Freedmen History Month to the task force. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.